Hi everyone, welcome back. This is our AP Computer Science class, and we are in our third lesson. And in this lesson, I really want us to nail down how to call methods on objects that we come from another class versus calling methods on objects that we're currently in that class. So they're both similar, but a little bit different, and it's really important skill to have. I want to continue talking about cookie class and our baker. So we have our cookie class for making cookies and our baker who likes to make those cookies. In our last lesson, we developed radius, type, has nuts, and we added the boolean is baked. We have two constructors. We have several different methods that return double, string, boolean, and another double and boolean. These methods give access to our users to find the radius and the type of cookie that they have and whether or not it has nuts. It also tells you whether or not it's baked, and we wrote a method that actually does a little bit of work. Most of these methods here just simply tell you what type of cookie you made, but this one actually does some calculation, which is when we're finally getting into some real computer programming, when we're having the computer do some work for us. Specifically, it calculates the diameter by multiplying the radius by 2. I want to continue doing that. I want to add some more methods. I want to add a constant, and I also want to talk a little bit about if statements. So first off, what I want to make is a constant that we can use to make our code more readable. So for this constant, I'm going to say final. Private final cups per flour. This will be a double, actually. Private final double cups flour per area. And I'm going to go ahead and assign it that we're going to say that the amount of cups of flour you need per area of the cookie. The bigger the cookie's area, the more cups of flour. And I'm just going to make something up. I'm going to say that it requires 0.15 cups of flour for every unit of area, and I guess we're measuring in inches here, or centimeters, or whatever. Now you'll notice I've added a new word, and I've done a couple of unusual things. First of all, I added the word final. And second of all, I'm actually initializing this value right at the get-go. And instead of doing it in the constructor. The word final makes it to where I can't change the value. And I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to add the word static. The word static does several different things, but for us, it's going to make sure that it initializes this first. So when we make constants, we're going to make them final, meaning we can't change them, and static, which means that it forms that constant first. That way, there's no question about whether or not cups of flour per area has been initialized before I start trying to use it. I could use it in the constructor even. We know that it's going to happen first. So we're going to talk a lot about static in the coming lessons, but for now I want you to realize that static assignment happens when you compile, as opposed to when you actually run or instantiate the class. Okay, so that's constants. Now, constants are really good because they make your code more readable and it avoids having magic numbers. So now we're just going to have, it's good for mathematical quantities like pi or e or anything like that. Now, let's write a method called getArea. We've already written one method. I think I'll put most of my new methods up here above the old ones. We've already written one method that actually does some work for us, so I think it'd be good practice to do it again. So first of all, do we want this method to be public? Do we want other people to be able to find the area of their cookie? Well, absolutely, right? So we'll make it public. The next thing that we need to think about is Java always requires that all of our methods have a return type. If we're not returning anything, we just put void. But if we are returning something, we need to say what type of thing we're returning. I would like to return a double because we'll be using radius, which is a double, in our math. Get area. Okay. So to find the area of a circle, we have to multiply pi times the radius squared. Pi can be found as a constant, just like the one we just made for cups of flour per area, but it's in what's called the math class. So to access a public constant, notice constants are always in all caps. You put the name of the class dot the constant. So that is pi from the math class. I'm going to say math.pi times radius times radius in order to square it. So math.pi is actually a public constant. We made our constant private, but if we made it public, then we could access this constant by saying cookie.cups per flour from another cups flour per area from another class. Again, notice constants are typically written in all capital letters so that you know that they're constants. All right, so now we've written a method to get the area. I want to add another method that calculates the amount of flour that's needed. So this method will tell you how much flour you need to make this particular cookie. So public, it'll be a double, and let's call it get flour needed. This method is going to calculate for us how much flour we need for this specific cookie. So remember that we have a constant that tells us how many cups of flour we need per unit area. So for example, if our cookie had only an area of 1 square unit, then we would need, according to our constant, just 0.15 cups of flour. But what if we had an area of 4? We had a big cookie with an area of 4. Well, how many cups of flour would we need for that? Well, we would need 4 of these, wouldn't we? So that would be 0.6. So I think you see the pattern, and what we need to do is take the area of the cookie and multiply it by that constant. So I'm going to return my constant, which is cups flour per cookie. Now, first of all, I want you to notice that unlike the pi, I didn't have to put the name of my class. And that's kind of the theme of today, is when do you have to put something in front of a method or a variable? Well, just like radius and type, I didn't have to say cookie dot or anything like that because I'm in that class. If you are working in a class that has the variable that you're talking about, or the constant, or the method, you just say the method. Okay? So, get flour needed. I'll take cups flour per cookie, and I'm going to multiply that by the area. Let's practice using the area method. So this is what is so important that I want you to realize. If you are in this class and you want to call another method from this class that you're in, you just say the name of the method with any needed arguments. So get area. I don't have to try and say something like my cookie1.getArea. I'm working on the cookie class. I'm calling a method in the cookie class. I just say the name of the method. Okay? All right. Let's pause there because the next methods I want to write are going to introduce some kind of new things. So let's pause there and just take a second to review. If you are calling a method that you've already written in this class, you just say the name of the method. Okay? All right. Let's go to the baker class and let's bake some cookies. It's not cups flour per cookie. It's cups flour per area. Oops. All right. No wonder it got mad at me. All right. Does it look better now, everyone? I bet y'all caught that, didn't you? Okay. So let's go to our baker class. I already have it open. Um, you could also just double click on it there. And we have one method here called bake cookies, right? And I want to practice in this method creating some cookies. But we've already made cookies on the workbench, and this is a great way to practice instantiating and understand how it works. And it's a great way to test your code. We can do that. We can right click on this and we can look at the different areas and different method. We could bake, get area, get cookie type. We can check our good flour needed, and it looks like it. I think that's working pretty good, right? Um, so that's a lot of cups of flour, isn't it? You know what? I think that what would make more sense is if we call this tablespoons flour. Yeah, let's do that because otherwise, I don't know. It's going to bother me that I don't. Hopefully, you don't need uh, that many cups of flour to make one cookie, right? All right. Or even how about this? Even teaspoons. Yeah, teaspoons. That makes sense. 5 teaspoons of flour. That I think that seems more reasonable. Sorry, it's just bothering me to picture a giant cup of flour to make one cookie. Oh well. Anyway, all right. But what I was talking about is that I want to practice making cookies from the baker class. So how do we do that? First, we start with the name of the class that we're going to instantiate. It's cookie. Then I need to come up with a variable name, like I'll just call this cookie1. Now, here's a good thing to remember: the class that we're instantiating is a capital letter. Your variable name should always be lowercase. It's a good way to tell them apart. Now we have to say new. Which class am I instantiating? I'm instantiating the cookie class, and we're going to give it our necessary arguments that are going to be caught by the parameters of the cookie constructor. So we can either leave it blank to get this default cookie, or we can give it these 3 things. Let's give it those 3 things. I'm going to make it a radius of 1.2. I'm going to make it type, let's say just plain old chocolate. Not chocolate chip, but the whole cookie's chocolate. That sounds good to me, right? And next, we're supposed to tell it whether or not it has nuts. I don't know, chocolate with a little bit of walnuts sounds good to me. Or maybe pecans or something like that. That'd be good, right? All right, so that's one cookie. Let's make another one. Cookie. I'm gonna call this one cookie 2 is equal to new cookie. And if we want, we'll just leave that one default. All right. Okay, so we now have a couple of cookie objects that we can bake. So let's review how to call our different methods on these objects. So these cookies are instances of a class, and we're not in that class right now. So in order to access anything about these cookies, I need to say the variable name, then the dot operator, and then the method. So for example, if I want to bake the cookie, I have to say cookie1 dot and then the name of the method, which was bake. See the important difference? Well, what I want to do is I want to write a couple of methods here. Let's just start with one, and then we'll go from there. So let's. I want to write a method in this class, and it's going to return a double, and I want it to be get total flour needed, and it's going to take in a type of cookie, which I'll just call C, and it's going to take a number of them. Okay. So I want to write like a little helpful method that we could use to get the total flour that's needed for our cookies. So we're so rarely making just one cookie, right? We're making a batch of them. So what I want to do is call this method. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to call it first, because we're working like right here in bake cookies, we're calling another method that's in the baker class. So we're just going to say its name, right? But then we're going to supply it with a cookie that we want to use and a number that we're going to use of them. The cookie that we send will be right here. It will be caught in C. It could be cookie 1. It could be cookie 2. It could be some other cookie. But it will be held in this variable C. For how long will this letter C hold that cookie? Well, as long as this yellow box that I'm in, from this curly brace to this curly brace, that's what C will be. All right, so how are we going to do this? Well, first we would get the amount of flour needed for one of the cookies. So flour, I'll call it flour for 1. How's that sound? Well, that is equal to C. How do we get the amount of flour we need to make that cookie? Well, we just wrote that method in the cookie class. Let's go back and look at it. It's just called get flour needed, right? Now, if I wanted to call this method in the cookie class, I would just say get flour needed. But I'm not in that class. I don't have a method called get flour needed here. I have total flour needed, but not get flour needed. That method belongs to a cookie. So I have to say C dot get flour needed. And then I have now found the amount of flour for one of the cookies. I can now return the flour for one cookie times the number of cookies that I'm making. And I can actually squeeze this down into one line. I could simply, instead of making this temporary variable here to hold what this returns, right? It returns a double, so I need something to catch it. I could actually just move that right here. Now, let's practice calling this method. We're going to be calling this method. So in order from the class that we're working in, so all I have to do is say the method, right? Let's start with our cookie 1. We're going to make cookie type 1, right? And I want to make a dozen of them. So that's going to work. That's going to call the method. But here's the problem. It's going to return to me that total amount of flour as a double, but I have nothing to catch it with. I have nothing to hold on to that value. So I either need to print it right now, or I need to make a variable to catch it, like I made this flour for 1 variable to catch what this sent me. So let's do that. Let's say double, I'll say cookie 1, or how about dozen cookie 1. All right, and I'm assigning to it the total flour needed from baking a cookie of type 1 and baking a dozen of them. And now maybe I could print to our console the amount of flour I need for dozen cookie 1. I can print the amount of flour I need for dozen cookie 1. All right. Let's try it out. So I'll make a new baker, and then I will run its bake cookies. That's the method that we are using. And it's 8.143 is the amount of flour that I'll need. All right. The next thing I want to do is I want to go back and write a method that would allow us to change the radius of our cookie. So after we make a cookie design, perhaps we're thinking, you know what? That's not really big enough, or maybe it's too big. And so I'd like to write a method that's going to allow us to change the cookie radius. The cookie radius is private, which means that I cannot directly access it from Baker. If I try and say cookie1.radius equals, maybe I want to make it bigger, 2.0, I'm going to get an interesting error here. It's going to say radius has private access in cookie. So it's actually telling me, hey, you are actually trying to access something that exists, but it's private access. What does that mean? It means you can't access it here. Not allowed, right? And right now I can get the radius. I can get it and then I can change it after I get it, but I'm not changing the one that belongs to the cookie. I need to instead, if I want to allow changing the radius, I need to make a method that allows me to do that. And this is one of the reasons why we like to access variables only through methods so that I can completely control how this is done. So public, I'm not going to return anything. I'm just going to be changing the radius. Now, if we're going to get a new radius if we're going to change our radius, we need to take in a value for that new radius. So I'm going to put a parameter here of type double, and I'll just call it rad because it's, I don't want to use the word radius. I've already used that word. All right, so in order to change a radius, we could simply say radius gets rad. Remember that the one on the left gets the value from the right of the assignment operator. And that's all well and good, but we're completely missing the power of changing the radius through methods, and that we get to control how it works. And what if somebody sent like -2? I mean, what if I'm trying to code this and I screw up and I give a bad radius? And that's part of the reason why we make variables private, is to prevent yourself from messing things up. So let's put in some checks on here. And while we do this, we'll get to introduce how to use if statements in Java. So I'm going to say this. If rad is less than 0, then I'm just going to make radius equal 0. So if they try and make it a negative number, we'll just make it a 0 radius, which means it has nothing, right? Else, if the new rad is greater than 10, that is way too big of a cookie, right? I mean, it's going to be all burnt on the outside and mush. If you're trying to make the one giant cookie, it doesn't work. I know they got the mall has those cookie cakes, but those are cakes. They're not cookies. They just kind of taste like a cookie. Well, then we're going to set radius at 10. Okay? Else. So if it wasn't too small and it wasn't too big, then we'll go ahead and we'll let them do it. All right, let's just take a moment here to talk through this code, make sure you understand the syntax. We have if, else if, and else. If you have an if statement, you do not have to have an else if or an else. You can. If followed by else if. Else if will only be used if the if statement was false. So there's no chance this can happen unless this was false. That's why it stands for else if. And then else is used whenever everything was false. Make sense? I hope so. All right. So we've done that. Next, I want to add another method, this time that gets a description of our cookie. I'd like to be able to describe it. If we're going to describe it in words, what should our return type be? That's right. It should be a string. All right, so I've got public string get description. So for the description of this cookie, I'm going to return this is a. So you know what? Instead of telling it the radius or the diameter, let's tell them the area. This is a, I'll say type, because that's my variable, right? Oh, add type cookie. It has an area of. Now, how do I get area? How do I call the method for getting the area of a cookie when I'm in the cookie class? I just say the name of the method, and it will return that value and be printed right away. And I'll put a period at the end of my sentence. Okay, cool. All right, let's go back to our baker class, and I want to write another method, this time in the baker class. And I'm going to make this one void. And it's just going to be called describe cookies. It's going to take in a type of cookie, and it's going to take in an amount of cookies. Earlier I called it number, but I'll use amount this time. All right, so describing the cookies. How are we going to describe it? Well, first of all, what I'd like to do is, instead of returning it, I'm going to print it. So we'll be going to use a system.out.println that will immediately print it to the console for people to see. And I'll say, we are baking how many cookies? Amount, the parameter amount of, and now it's where I'm going to add my cookie description, which again I'm using the letter C, okay? And that C is a different C than this C because it's a temporary variable. C dot get description. We just wrote that method, right? Now that method is in the cookie class, so I have to call it on the name of a cookie object that I have, which in this case is C. All right. Then what I'm going to say is, it will require, I want to get the total amount of flour that we're going to need. So I'll call get total flour needed, because I'm calling that method from right here in that class. Get total amount of flour needed. I'm just going to move this down so you can see it right quick. You should just type yours all in on one line, but I want to make it a little easier to see on the camera. It's getting kind of spread out. Get total flour needed. Well, what do I have to send there? What does it require? It requires a cookie. All right. Well, what cookies? What cookie am I doing? Just cookie C. How many of them am I doing? Well, remember, we wrote this method that included describe cookies, takes a cookie type and an amount of those cookies, so we know the amount is amount. And I kept changing what that flour unit was, and I'm still not happy with it, so I'm just going to say of flour. All right. There we go. And I'll put that back on one line now, and I think I might be missing a parenthesis to close out my print statement, maybe. I'm not sure. Yep, I sure am. All right, see if it likes that. Okay. Super. All right, let's see what happens. So in order to, what I want to do, actually, you know what? I'm just gonna let's change this bake cookies. This bake cookies has kind of been like our entry point for this program. So what I'm going to do is I am going to call describe cookies, and let's call it on cookie 1 with 12, and let's call it on cookie 2 with 24. And notice I'm not returning anything in this method because we're just printing, so it's void, so I don't have to have anything to catch it. All right, that looks good. So to run our baker program here, first thing we need to do is make an instance of the baker class. The next thing we need to do is pick the method. Now we have a lot of them here, right? But we are going to pick the one that is our main entry point, which is bake cookies. and hopefully we get some cool information here. We are baking 12 of, this is a chocolate chip cookie. I may need to change the way that works, make it work a little bit prettier. But all right, looks pretty good to me. So we're getting a lot of good information. We're calling methods within the class by just saying the method name. We're calling methods on objects from a different class by using a variable name for the object, then the dot operator, and then the method. And we are catching things that are returned like I did here. So I think you've learned a lot. Don't forget about the if statements. Those are going to be really helpful going forward. And practice hard. Until next time, take care.